Hello, and welcome back to The Conversation Piece with your host, Akila. Blackamoor. Defined as a person with dark skin, dark black skin. Oftentimes offensive, but in the 17th century, this was how a black person was described. One such person with this description was aboard the vessel Anne, a soldier by the name of Abraham Pierce, the Black Pilgrim. Or was it Hercules? Or perhaps John Pedro? In the early stages of colonization in America, black people were described as blackamoor, a derivative of black Moor. It is believed that Pierce came to Plymouth as an indentured servant, and some historians believe he was never enslaved. In fact, some historians believe he even owned land after arriving in Plymouth in 1623. Abraham Pierce does not come without controversy. In 1981, historians announced the discovery of a black pilgrim, and with that discovery came elation, but the excitement was short-lived. Some speculate if Abraham Pierce was even black. Oh, the drama. Brad Pierce, a radiologist, reviewed DNA tests of descendants of Abraham and found that Pierce's father was not of African descent, but the test never proved if his mother was not black. Those tests were never conducted. But in 1643, militia document does have a blackamoor listed. The only question is, who was it? The name of Hercules was first mentioned in a court record in 1643, determining how long Hercules was to serve William Hutch as a servant. Then there is the question of John Pedro, described as Nagar, age 30, who arrived on the ship Swan in 1623. There was a black population in Plymouth, and it was growing, but black people in Plymouth were categorized in three groups: freemen, bonded or indentured, or enslaved. The Pilgrims in general were considered religious, for they were escaping religious persecution back in England, so the institution of slavery looked different in Plymouth County. Although free black people didn't have the same rights as white freemen, slavery as an institution wasn't a staple of their society. In fact, Pilgrims rarely could afford to buy slaves, so the black population in Plymouth could integrate more easily into society. By the year 1715, records indicate as many as 2,000 enslaved people lived in Massachusetts. The founding of Plymouth is considered one of the early establishments of American civilization, but black people have always been a part of that early establishment of America, even though some would like the history to be buried. Pierce, Hercules, and John Pedro. Let's claim them all. The search still continues for the blackamoor. Black history is American history. Period.
I was wondering about our yesterdays and digging through the rubble. And to say the least, somebody went to a hell of a lot of trouble to make sure that when we looked things up, we wouldn't fare too well, and we would come up with totally unreliable pictures of ourselves. But I've compiled what few facts I could, such as they are, to see if we could find out a little bit of something, and this is what I got so far. First, white folks discovered Africa. They claimed it fair and square. Cecil Rhodes couldn't have been robbing nobody because, hell, there wasn't nobody there. And white folks brought all the civilization because there wasn't none around. How could the folks be civilized when wasn't nobody writing nothing down? And just to prove all of their suspicions, well, didn't take too long. They found out that there were whole tribes of people in plain sight running around with no clothes on. That's right. The men, the women, the young, and the old righteous folks covered their eyes. And no time was spent considering the environment. Hell no, this just wasn't civilized. And another piece of information they had, or at least this is what we were taught, is that unlike the civilized people of Europe, these tribal units actually fought. And yes, there was some crude implements and Yes, there was primitive art. And yes, they were masters of hunting and fishing, and courtesy came from the heart. And yes, there was love and medicine, religion, intertribal communication by drum, but no paper, no pencils, and no other utensils. And hell, these folks never even heard of a gun. And this is why the colonies came, to stabilize the land, because the dark continent had copper and gold, and the discoverers had themselves a plan. They would discover all the places with promise. You didn't need no titles and deeds. Then they would appoint people to make everything legal, to sanction the trickery and greed. And back in the jungle, when the natives got restless, they would call it guerrilla attack. And they would never describe that the folks finally got wise and decided that they would fight back. And still, we are victims of word games. Semantics is always a bitch. Places once referred to as underdeveloped are now called mineral rich. And the game goes on eternally. Unity kept just beyond reach. Egypt and Libya used to be in Africa. They've now been moved to the Middle East. There are examples galore, I assure you. But if interpreting were left up to me, I'd be sure every time folks knew this version wasn't mine, which is why it is called His Story.
Thank you again for tuning in to another episode of the Conversation Piece podcast. I am your humble host, Akila, requesting that you join me again. So, until then, be safe, love, and value yourself so that you can love and value others. I bid you adieu with the greeting, Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you.